Okay, Brett as our first call today, or our question today. Hi.
So I was reading through Hosea 1 through 3 earlier this week. When I got to the end of 3, it talks about, well, it says the last days about the people of Israel returning to God and David, their king. Um, and that was getting me thinking about some beliefs of the last days where they think that Israel Jews across the world are going to all return to Israel. And it kind of gave me that, like this passage kind of gave me that feel like this is what it's teaching. And I went and listened to Hosea on your site, and I'm in agreement that it's talking more about the remnant of Israel.
Uh-huh.
Now, my only problem with that, which is uh, complicating it for me, is that in chapter 1, it's talking about his son. What is that? Lo Ami. He
Mm-hmm.
says, "For you are not my people." And then
Right.
in chapter 2, it says, um, it kind of takes it back, like on Lo Rama or Lo Ami, you are my people. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like he denies, in the context to me, it's denying the nation Israel at the time, and then later on, it's in the same context to me, it's saying, you know, the ones I rejected, I'm accepting you now. So um, my interpretation of it was like it's talking about the nation Israel in one, it would be talking about the nation Israel in two then. So then in the last days in three, how would that only be talking about the remnant and remnant being like the church?
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to make sense of this because I'm a millennial and partial
Mm-hmm.
preterist and stuff, and I was
Sure.
just it was complicating it for me. Could you explain?
Well, yeah, you have to realize that the church is not something else than Israel. The church is simply the remnant of Israel itself, which is the believing portion of Israel. And now, of course, if you're a Gentile, I'm a Gentile. I don't know if you're Jewish or Gentile, but Gentiles who believe have always been able to be part of Israel. In the Old Testament, a Gentile could become part of Israel. Ruth and Rahab were Gentiles who became part of Israel. And anyone who wanted to get circumcised and keep the Sabbath and keep the covenant could be part of Israel in the Old Testament. So Israel never was defined strictly by ethnicity, though there was, of course, an Israelite ethnicity who were descended from the man Israel in 12 tribes. So the word Israel is used a variety of ways, but when God talks about Israel, Hosea is talking to the northern kingdom that split off the 10 nations to the north, and they were apostate. I mean, the nation was apostate, with the exception of the remnant of them. Remember, Elijah was prophesying in the northern kingdom, and he said, "Hey, they're all worshiping Baal. I alone am left." And God said, "No, I've reserved 7,000 to myself who've not bowed the knee to Baal." So there was a remnant even in that apostate nation, even though Elijah didn't know who they were. God knew who they were, and they are the true Israel. The ones who are true to God are the true remnant. And when he says, "You are not my people," he's talking to the apostate nation as a nation. The nation had been worshiping golden calves in Bethel and Dan from their founding and never repented of that. And he said, "You're not my people." But then he kind of redefines Israel as only the true remnant. And this happens. I mean, this happens in a lot of the prophets. I don't know if you're reading through all the prophets at this point in time, but
Yeah.
of course, Isaiah does this, Jeremiah does this, Ezekiel does this, and the minor prophets that you read will do that. That they condemning the nation of Israel, which is not just the remnant, but everybody who's part of the country that's called Israel. And then he'll make promises to Israel where all of his promises are only to the faithful. But the faithful are part of Israel too. It's just that God said many times that He's only going to keep His promises to the faithful. He said that in Deuteronomy 28. He makes that very clear in Jeremiah 18, verses 7 through 10. Uh, he makes it clear in Psalm 50, verse 16, where he says to the wicked Israelites, he says, "What right do you have to claim my covenant for yourself? Take it on your lips, and you reject my ways," and so forth. So, I mean, God makes it very clear that his covenant and his promises are only for the faithful. Initially, all the faithful were part of Israel because the Gentiles didn't know anything about God. He hadn't come to them and given them information. But Israel, the nation, had received. They had rejected it, generally speaking, but his promises would be fulfilled to whatever faithful ones he found in there. And when he starts talking about, I will call them my people who were not my people, and her beloved who is not beloved, it's interesting that Paul quotes that in Romans 9, and Peter quotes it in 1 Peter 2. Both of them quote these very verses uh, from Hosea 1 and 2, and they apply it to the Gentiles or to the church as a whole. But see, to them, the church as a whole is the faithful remnant of Israel, along with faithful Gentiles who become part of it. Just like in the Old Testament, Gentiles could become faithful to the covenant, and they became part of Israel. So when Israel began, when Jesus, started the new covenant, it was struck with the faithful remnant of Israel. And for many years, it was only Jewish people in it. But then Gentiles started coming in, and when they did, it didn't change its identity. It was still the faithful remnant of Israel. It's just now that just as in the Old Testament, Gentiles could be part of Israel. Now in the New Covenant, Gentiles could be part of Israel too. So there's a kind of a promise that goes to the faithful of Israel. But then Paul and Peter both apply the promises of this chapter to the Gentile converts as well. And when Paul quotes it in Romans 9 and says, I will call them my people who were not my people, which is quoting this passage. Paul, in the context, is pointing out that this is referring to Gentiles. Gentiles were formerly not his people. Now, obviously, when you read Hosea, it sounds like he's talking about the same people. But you see, Israel always is the same people. It's just that the portion of them that are faithful will be separated out as beloved. And any Gentiles that are part of that, there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile in that company. There's no Jew or Gentile, bond or free, So Paul and Peter both think of the whole church, including Gentiles, are the true Israel. And so the morphing from the apostate Israel in the 10 tribes in the time of Hosea, who were not God's people and not beloved because of their apostasy, it morphs in the prophecy to the true people of God. Jews, some Israelites, there were 7,000 that didn't bow the knee to Baal in Elijah's time. There's more than that now. And then the Gentiles with them. Now, then chapter 3, of course, I think is describing the Messianic era, the era in which we are now living. David, their king, is ruling. David is the Messiah of the house of David. So, it's kind of difficult to grasp until you realize there's really not a difference in identity between Israel in the Old Testament and Israel in the New. If we understand that the true Israel in the Old Testament were only really the faithful who were part of Israel. Yeah, there were unfaithful people in the nation of Israel, but the promises were only to the faithful. The rebukes were only to the unfaithful.
Yeah, I guess what just threw me off is just because it used the same name in chapter 1. So it's almost like it called apostate. Well, it related apostate Israel as Lo Ami, and then he talks about Lo Ami taking them back. So it was like, I thought it was like the apostate, I'm bringing you back because it's using that same name. But I did want to also talk about that last thing you mentioned. So when it says at the end of chapter 3, in the last days, you're thinking that's talking about where we're at now. This
the age that began with Pentecost. Yeah, the age that began with Pentecost.
I don't like saying millennium, but it's
right.
Church age, I guess.
Many amillennialists would say that the last days is the whole period from the first coming to the second coming of Christ. In other words, they relate the last days as the church age, we might say. I'm inclined myself to see it more as reference to the last days of the Jewish order, because the Jewish order still continued to be operating up until 70 AD. And so for the first 40 years, the first days of the new covenant, it was the same period as the last days of the old covenant. There was overlap. I see it a lot like when God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt and to Mount Sinai, he made a covenant with them, just like Jesus later made the new covenant with his disciples in the upper room. But the covenant involved them, inheriting the land, but it was 40 years before they actually did inherit the land. It's like God made a covenant with them, which included the inheriting of the land, but there was a whole generation of transition because though God had taken them out of Egypt, he hadn't gotten Egypt out of them yet. They kind of had to,
Yeah.
they had to be weaned of their golden calf, idolatrous tendencies from the 400 years in Egypt. And that took a whole generation. And likewise, when Jesus made the new covenant, it took a whole generation of Jewish believers, to really grasp that, the old covenant was not, I mean, the bondage to the law was simply not relevant anymore. But it's awfully hard for people who, for generations, have been taught this is what God wants you to do, to just kind of throw it off and have no compunction about eating pork or something. So
Yeah.
so God kind of accommodated them, let them have a generation to kind of get used to it. But the Gentiles, of course, that Paul evangelized during that same period had never been Jewish. They never had Jewish compunctions. And so Paul, his churches, he insisted, should never be brought under the law in any way. The Jews who had always been under the law, well, he didn't argue that they couldn't keep doing those things for the time being. It was going to end soon enough when the temple was destroyed. So, we are the last day. Peter said in Acts chapter 2, when he gave his first sermon, that they were in the last days. He quoted Joel and said, this is what Joel said, that in the last days, God will pour out his spirit on all flesh. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, that he and his readers were living at the ends of the ages, which I understand to mean the end of the old age and the beginning of the new age, the overlapping ends of the two
Right.
ages. John said in 1 John that little children, it's the last hour. And as you've heard that Antichrist has come, even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last hour. Peter said to the rich, rebuking them in his day, in James, did I say Peter? James chapter 5. James said, you have heaped treasures up in the last days. The writer of Hebrews said, God, who at sundry times in diverse manners spoke to our fathers in time past through the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. In 1 Peter chapter 1, it says that Jesus was foreordained from the beginning of the world, but was manifest in these last days for you. So, I mean, Peter and Paul and James and John, the writer of Hebrews, whoever that may have been, they all said that they were living in the last days. So either they mean that the whole age of the church that they were at the beginning of, and which we're still in, that whole 2,000 years is the last days, or they were seeing that since the new order had begun, the old order was going to be short-lived, and they were
Basically like the last days of this covenant, almost.
exactly
Timing event.
the
Okay.
last days of the order that they had all
Order.
been born into when they were children and stuff. Yeah, before they were converted. So
Okay.
yeah, so the last days at least applied to the first generation of Christianity, because all those people in the first generation said they were living in the last days. But what began in the last days of the old order was also the first days of the new order, which didn't end in 70 AD.
Right.
So I mean, we're still in that order.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the order that began in the last days of the old covenant, but continues beyond the end of that covenant. That's how I understand the trajectory of history in the Bible.
Yeah, cool. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for all this. And also wanted to say, if you do a message on full preterism or partial preterism, I'll definitely be listening to that.
Oh, okay. If there's an interest
Yeah.
in it, I don't mind doing it. I'd love to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never actually just given a topical on that one thing. Yeah.
Thanks.